Climate change is a health emergency. It's a refrain that we say at the Lung Association, health groups nationwide say it. We know that people are living it, right? Like we know the science is clear, but people now in their own lives, unfortunately, more and more every year have personal experiences that climate change is putting their health and their life at risk. We've been careful to say what last week's action does and also what it doesn't. So we saw an action that basically revokes the finding that greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, despite the reams of science and people's lived experience that clearly shows otherwise. That action also wiped out greenhouse gas standards for vehicles, so pollution standards that make future vehicles cleaner. Those are both real gut punches to health, frankly. However, they did not wipe out with that action other protections, and we are going to fight tooth and nail for each of those protections to stay in place as best as we possibly can.
Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of Code Green. I always say that, but there's so many special things to talk about that mainstream corporate news just gives short shrift to. This one actually broke through and got some coverage on the news networks for about a minute. Basically read a headline and then it's back to the usual Epstein files and yada yada. But this one is such an important story that we are taking time out, and I'm very grateful to my guests taking time out on President's Day, ironic, to talk about what this president, I call him a fake president. I'm sorry. When your campaign is based on lies, it's hard to recognize legitimacy there. And when you don't recognize science, you know who we're talking about. And you probably by now, if you're a regular viewer of Code Green, know what we're about to talk about. And that is the pretty outrageous, earth-shaking, mind-blowing, for those of us who know what's going on with our atmosphere, our climate, our oceans, our ecosystems in decline. The endangerment finding, something that was enacted back in 2009 under Obama. It's got some history. We can perhaps go into that, but we'll start with right now how this could possibly happen and what it means. I'm very excited to have Laura Kate Bender. She's with American Lung Association, the Vice President of Nationwide Advocacy and Public Policy. So she is the perfect person to discuss, uh, well, what this means. But before we get into that, just tell me how you're feeling. Was this something that the American Lung Association and other environmental and public health organizations anticipated? Was there, much talk about this, or was this yet another bombshell, part of Steve Bannon's flood the zone, let's just kill the planet, scorched earth policy, the latest installment? Or is this a bigger deal than that?
So this is one that we were ready for in the short term. In the immediate term, we had watched them propose this. We had waited throughout the process of them considering it. We were, kind of on pins and needles, waiting for it to be finalized, ready to go, ready to tell the story about why it was harmful. But if you look back a couple administrations ago, in previous years, revoking the endangerment finding was a beyond the pale action. It was so far beyond any of the rollbacks that we had seen previously that people weren't even really asking for it. So we were ready in the short term, but if you ask several years ago me whether I thought we'd be here, it would be a surprise.
Now, let's tell our viewers who may not know what this means. It really takes away the legal underpinning for so many protections against emissions for our environment, for public health, coming from power plants, coming from cars, and more. And this was hard fought, like all of these regulations and rollbacks, have been, and late in coming, and not nearly enough under Obama and Biden. Sorry, but it's Democrats who seem to do most of the good and a little bit less of the bad. Of course, never enough. To have this happen at a time when it's really the 11th hour for our climate, when we're seeing all the impacts of extreme weather. I mean, climate change is a killer, right?
Climate change is a health emergency. It's a refrain that we say at the Lung Association, health groups nationwide say it. We know that people are living it, right? Like we know the science is clear, but people now in their own lives, unfortunately, more and more every year have personal experiences that climate change is putting their health and their life at risk. To your other point, I guess I'll say at the top, we've been careful to say what last week's action does and also what it doesn't. So we saw an action that basically revokes the finding that greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, despite the reams of science and people's lived experience that clearly shows otherwise. That action also wiped out greenhouse gas standards for vehicles, so pollution standards that make future vehicles cleaner. Those are both real gut punches to health, frankly. However, they did not wipe out with that action other protections, and we are going to fight tooth and nail for each of those protections to stay in place as best as we possibly can.
And what would those be, Laura?
Oh, there's so many limits that affect greenhouse gases, methane and methane emissions limits on the oil and gas industry, carbon pollution standards for power plants. It's clear by revoking the endangerment finding, by, essentially saying that greenhouse gases do not endanger us, at least not in an amount that makes it worth regulating. It's clear what tack the administration is taking. The EPA leadership has said that they want to revoke the protections that were hard fought in previous years, but I don't concede they can wipe all those out with the stroke of one pen.
And we should say, while the EPA used to stand for Environmental Protection Agency, and that's exactly what it's supposed to be doing, protecting our planet, our natural resources, nature, our only home last time I checked, not Mars, and our health. And now it's become under Trump 1 and especially 2.0, the Environmental Plundering Agency or Environmental Pollution Agency. So when people hear, wait a minute, isn't the EPA supposed to be protecting us? Well, it depends who's running it. Lee Zeldin, we need to take a moment to talk about. He called it a scam, climate change, of course, a con job. Trump, of course, has called it a big hoax, the biggest one ever perpetrated on, America. That was during Climate Week in New York. He got up in front of the UN and the whole world, calling it, biggest con job ever. Scam, hoax, all those ridiculous words that never really existed in the national vocabulary on serious political and important issues before. What is their end goal? I mean, do they have reservations on another planet? Do they have children? They have grandchildren? Is it really just all about power, money, greed for the fossil fuel industry, which, of course, as we know, heavily, heavily donated to his campaign? They don't even hide the fact that this is a quid pro quo, that this is, pay for play.
Well, we certainly have a long history of seeing polluters fight to get clean air protections off the books. But to underscore how extreme this particular action was, this wasn't even something that a lot of industry was even asking for.
Mm,
Like,
right.
this goes beyond the wish list. And, frankly, was outside the mainstream, even a few years ago. So it's honestly, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm no lawyer, and, I don't know how the legal case will play out, but it it was enough for us to be able to file suit to say, this pretty clearly goes against your obligations under the Clean Air Act. EPA has to regulate air pollution that puts people's health at risk, and the science is very clear that that includes greenhouse gases.
And there was a public comment period, and hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists, experts, activists, concerned citizens, those who understand what's at stake, sent letters and I'm sure flooded them. And we knew that they were going to ignore it, and they did. How is that not outrageous, especially when they're, blatantly ignoring the science? Experts weigh in. They're really clearly not experts if they think it's a scam, a hoax, and a con job. How can this, how can they get away with this? I say they're getting away with murder because climate kills and theft of our children's future. I mean, is that overstating it? That's how it feels to me.
I mean, it's clear that failure to act on climate change kills people, right? I mean, we know that it makes people sicker, it makes people more subjected to air pollution, to infectious diseases, to a whole host of things that harm their health, their well-being, their livelihoods. That's, the need for action is urgent. That's why the health community cares about this so much, as do you. Um, it was heartening to see how many people came out to oppose this action. As you said, there were people who took time out of their day to show up to a virtual public hearing to read to EPA staff why it's so important to them that the agency act on climate change, or why it's so important that our vehicles keep getting cleaner, which they have been, and could keep doing. Um, all of that goes into the record and it doesn't disappear. And again, I can't speak to what will happen in this case, but all of that matters when people sue over rules that roll back clean air protections. It's in the record, it's there for later. In this case, the scientific record is very clear. There were, as you said, piles and piles of studies, scientists came out of the woodwork, tons of research. All of that still exists, and it's in the record around this rule from that public comment period. And that could be very useful down the line.
And like you said, the industry wasn't even pushing for this at this late stage. Even they're embarrassed, to say that there's no climate change. Yet these supposed leaders are pushing this. I worked on a campaign, an educational campaign back in 2002, co-founded Don't Be Fueled, Mothers for Clean and Safe Vehicles, CAFE standards, fuel efficiency. Here it is, how many? Almost 25 years later. The fact that the car industry, really because of California's stricter emission standards, they really had to comply, in other places. So that's 20, 25 years old. It's still not enough. There's still too many gas guzzling SUVs out there, which is what we were trying to get moms to stop buying. And yes, hybrids, EVs are catching on, but not nearly enough, not nearly as much as China. So what does it mean when even the industry knows sees the writing on the wall, if you will? And so who are they? What are they kissing?
I don't know. I don't know. And what I do know is that, the clean vehicles are a success story. They're an American success story, right? I mean, we have gotten vehicles year over year that have been less polluting. They've been less contributing to greenhouse gases. They've been more fuel efficient.
They're fun
They've
to
had
drive. They're quiet. They're smooth. They're clean. You feel green.
Yeah, we just, we have this success story where people are getting access to cleaner and cleaner cars and trucks year over year that helps protect their kids, that doesn't sacrifice their safety. It's a win-win. And that's the thing. When we take climate action, we're not only reducing greenhouse gases from vehicles or other places, but we're also reducing other air pollution at the same time. That same tailpipe that's emitting greenhouse gases is also emitting other types of pollution. So, for me, I see cleaning up our vehicles as something to be so proud of, right? I mean, we've had these strong standards like the ones you campaigned for, to help make the air when I grew up cleaner than when my parents grew up. And I had hoped that that would make the air for my kids cleaner than the air that I grew up with. To your point, I don't think we can put the genie back in the bottle. People are happy with these vehicles, and automakers want certainty. They want to know that they will keep selling them in a stable regulatory environment.
It's not
So
easy to retool assembly lines, and they
no, it's
plan
not.
for, EVs to catch on. It's still been slow. I mean, up until a few years ago, it was like 2% of all, new vehicles purchased were EVs. It's gone up. I don't know if it's reached 5% or 10% yet, but it should be everyone because they're becoming more affordable now. And like I said, they're fun to drive. You don't have to pay here in California $5 a gallon. You don't have to wait in line for that. Charging is easy. If you're on the road and you need to recharge, it's always, a shopping center, near a restaurant, near coffee. And most people are starting to have chargers at home. So this should really be catching on faster, than it has, and we know why. A lot of it was rhetoric and lies about EVs, catching on fire. Well, all vehicles, if they have a bad enough accident, will probably catch fire. The planet's on fire. That should be a consideration. And having just lived in Texas, I can tell you a lot of, giant SUVs, pickup trucks. Not that they're not hard to find here in Northern California, but it makes you, and they're proud to be wasting fuel. Maybe that's a Texas thing, but it's just fuelish, right? Fossil fuelish. And I want to ask you, I think I saw that some 13 million people die every year from pollution and climate impact. I don't know if that is for the United States, the world, if that's the current number, but it's a big nice, it's significant.
Yeah, there's so many ways that this impacts people's health. So, in the immediate term, if you are, breathing in air pollution from a car's tailpipe, if you're downwind of a coal-fired power plant or a gas-fired power plant, there's pollution that's going to harm your health right away, right? There's, you know, oxides of nitrogen and things that form particle pollution, things that damage your lungs in the short term can cause, I have asthma, it could give me an asthma exacerbation, make me pull out my inhaler, make me not go for a run outside that day. There's short-term impacts. There's the long-term impacts of the people that have to breathe that day in and day out. And then the climate impacts are on top of that. So we're seeing rising temperatures mean more smog forms, or rising temperatures meaning that more wildfires pollute with smoke on the top of a host of other, health harms. So it really compounds itself on top.
And it impacts fertility and brain function. I mean, all these pollutants, right? And you mentioned something, you didn't mention environmental justice, but that's what you're referring to. People who, don't have the means to fight, factories coming in and are downwind immediately of, the emissions. that we have some progress on environmental justice. And guess what? They wiped out with every opportunity and are continuing to. We're a year into this administration, and last year, about a year ago, just a little bit more, Pacific Palisades burned down and Altadena. And look what happened in Texas, where the floods occurred not an hour from where we used to live, and those tragedies. How can they just ignore that? When it's so clear in so many ways that this is harming public health. And of course, greenhouse gases don't just go away, even if we were to stop emitting altogether tomorrow, which ain't going to happen. They're up there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Uh, it defies logic. It's not only mind-boggling, it's mind-bending. And just help me. What are things like at the American Lung Association when things like this happened last week? Do you have a collective primal scream?
Oh, I'd say I appreciate the opportunity to respond and to put out a marker to do something about it. I know this probably sounds a little bit cliched, but I really do. I love that I get to work at an organization that is, working on a piece of this, a meaningful piece of this in a way that helps improve people's health. Um, it's as I think you probably know very personally, it's better to raise your voice than to sit and stew and not have the opportunity to raise your voice. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity. I
Well,
think for us,
I raise mine a lot, mostly to my television when my husband has the news on. I'm in the new. I used to be in the news business the first half of my career, CBS. I can no longer turn on the news, but my husband has it on a lot. I happen to walk through the room.
yeah, it's tough. It's tough to tune out all the bad when it comes to what's happening on clean air and climate change. I think, for me personally, I was grateful to see how much coverage the announcement last week got. To your point, it's never enough. There's never enough that we could hear in the news about the impacts that climate change has here at home, right? It's not a future problem. It's not happening somewhere else. It's happening right here and right now, and people are living it.
Mhm, mhm.
I often say this, the silver lining of this terrible slate of climate fueled disasters we've had the last several years is that people have a personal story. People can't ignore it because it's happening to them and they can see the change and they're unfortunately experiencing harms from that. But people are also the most compelling advocates when it comes to that. We know a personal story is far more compelling than anything I can say from my desk in Washington, D.C. with facts and figures, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what's going to convince our policymakers to take more action is when their constituents won't stop talking about it because they're living it. And that's the only thing that we can use to overcome the obstacles in front of us right now.
Well, one thing I will not stop talking about, as anyone who knows me and has been listening to my shows for years, is the need for better public education. I say if we don't, engage the public, we're never going to win, and we aren't. And you see the billions going into clean tech. Maybe a few of those, a fraction, will turn into something that could be helpful. But carbon collecting, all the things that we've seen so far are not scalable, not realistic, and yet there's very little funding for independent journalism that now when corporate media, the few places that hired a climate reporter team just got, obliterated, more need than ever to educate, the public. And people say, well, what makes you think, they're not? Well, let's see, half the country voted for a climate denier, an avowed, proud climate denier, not once, but twice. So that tells me that there's a need for this. And do you think that the people who voted for Trump just don't have not connected the dots? They are voting against their own self-interest, certainly if their parents or grandparents. That's the confounding part for me. I don't. Well, I don't know if he stole the election. Like I say, if you have a campaign that's based on lies, it doesn't feel legitimate to me. But who asked me?
I think if you look at polls, people on a bipartisan basis want clean air protections. They think it's important to clean up air pollution. They don't want their kid to have an asthma attack. They even think that the most polluted places should get cleaned up first, right? Which is exactly what we were talking about earlier. I think environmental justice has unfortunately become a trigger word for some, but all it is saying if there are places where there's lots of overlapping harms, we should address that. And people are on board with that, when you state it as a concept, you know, so I have to think that people continue to care about the air their kids are breathing. They continue not to want them to have harm to their lungs on their way to school or when they're supposed to be playing outside or at practice. When you connect with people on an individual basis about their values for their kids' future, we all agree. And the Lung Association's nonpartisan. These issues are nonpartisan or should be. So we just have to figure out how to cut through with folks that don't necessarily make the immediate connection or for whom the phrase climate change has gotten, so politicized that it's a turnoff, and figure out how to make the case that what we're actually talking about is things that are making their kids' air dirtier in a way that can harm them, but in a way that there are real solutions for that can help everybody be healthier.
Okay, shameless plug, making the case to support something that never seems to get supported, independent environmental journalism. I know it sounds like a PSA, but if I told you how long I've been doing this, I'm having to fund it because even foundations don't realize that this is a key missing piece of the solutions is really connecting dots, for Americans. And if we just, are talking to the choir online only, it's not going to get us there. Our eco literacy levels are lower than ever in this country, clearly. And as you say, most people support clean air and clean water. And that reminded me, you probably noticed too, when, the Republicans, Trump, they're campaigning Trump's one line about anything environmental is a lie. We're all for clean air and water, but they'll never mention climate change. Like that was their ruse, right? To say they did, but they don't. Clearly, time and time again, they show they don't care at all about people, especially children and people living downwind from these pollutants. These are people who don't have enough power, clout, money, and should, through no fault of their own. And these billionaires, whether it's Trump, Musk, whatever, being greedy, I'll call it out, they need to get richer at the expense of not just who's alive today, but those to come. I mean, that to me, and it reminds me of the whole gun thing. Majority of Americans want gun control. Why should assault weapons be legal? They are only designed, as far as I know, to kill more people faster. And yet the lobby, NRA, just like the fossil fuel industry, just like the tobacco industry, they keep winning. And in 2026, I think it's time to say enough is enough. And we're mad as hell and not going to take it. But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, people don't always align with their members of Congress or with the folks that represent them in Washington. And I think this is a great example of that. You know, even in these polarized times, people still want to see action on climate change. They want to see action on air pollution. They overwhelmingly support measures to clean up air pollution, including from our vehicles. Um, One other thing I like to cite, and this isn't the Lung Association's research, it's from Eco America, but they do a climate change survey that consistently finds that people care about climate change, but that we underestimate the extent to which the people around us care about climate change.
Right.
And I try to keep that in my head
89%,
all the
89%.
time.
Yep. Yep. 89% of Americans, maybe it's worldwide, care about climate change, but they don't know that others feel the same way. And again, I go back to, I may sound like a broken record, and I'm old enough to have used records growing up. I'll listen to records, whatever, corporate media. An example I always give is just imagine if they covered the climate crisis like they covered the COVID crisis, how overnight, almost, behavior changed in this country and around the world. And yet climate has and will kill more people. And yet there's an environmental component to pandemics as well. It's those dots that don't get connected, if you agree. And that's the only way we have to turn this around because the truth is on our side, science is on our side. And when I say our, I just mean people who are looking out for the public good as opposed to personal political gain.
Yeah, I love that you brought in COVID just because, from where I sit at the Lung Association, we work on environmental health issues, clean air and climate change, but we also work on access to healthcare. We work on lung disease, research and treatment. We work on prevention. We work on tobacco, obviously. And these things all overlap, right? Like when you invest in your public health infrastructure and you invest in action to reduce air pollution, including the pollution that drives climate change, all of that can benefit each other. And then when you do the opposite of that, when you undermine our public health infrastructure, then it's that much less able to help folks when they get hit by the impacts of the climate crisis.
It's like a win-win-win versus a lose-lose-lose, and we keep losing. Again, the good guys who know too much, right? I always say we need more people to know a little bit more, so those of us who know too much can get better sleep at night. And it's just like it's like a parallel universe, right? I don't know about you, but in my inbox and all the newsletters I get, having been on this beat so long, they're talking about collapse, ecological collapse and end of world scenarios. And I always wish that when I would read these articles when I'm feeling strong enough, uh, we're exaggerating, come on. And I even told myself that it can't be that bad. I guess as a mother and new grandmother, I wanted to believe that. But no, I can never find fault with the data points that they use, those who are, journalists, writers on these issues. Um, and then there's the rest of the, Epstein files, Venezuela, Venezuela, Greenland, Greenland, issues that are most of them non-issues or created issues when the important ones like protecting all life on this planet get marginalized, if not
Yeah.
completely ignored.
And to your point about, a lose, lose, lose versus a win, 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 I think as again, as I'm sure you experience all the time, when you're trying to get people to care about climate change, see how it impacts their health and take action, you have to instill some amount of hope, right? If it's all gloom and doom, people leave feeling,
Right.
like how we feel a lot.
And
Um,
yeah.
and of course there's hope, right? Like number one, there's things that people can do right now to reduce their exposure to dangerous air pollution or the impact of climate change just by knowing.
Mhm.
If a physician knows to look for Lyme disease where they didn't used to need to look for Lyme disease, then that helps patients. If I know to check my air quality before I go for a run, I could save myself an asthma attack. We shouldn't have to do those things, but we can, and we can help protect our health from that exposure. But
Mhm.
then, of course, again, the same solutions that benefit our health immediately also benefit the climate. There's no trade-off. So,
Yeah. Personal
you're right.
health,
I mean,
planetary health, there's a connection there, just like
right.
mind body. Hello.
Exactly. There's this vision of a solution that is with technology we already have. We don't have to make it up. We can just implement what we have, what we know is cleaner. Essentially what doesn't burn stuff for fuel. We can get there if we have the political will to get there, and the incremental progress matters. We just need more and more and more.
Yeah, I was trained by Al Gore along with thousands of others. I was in one of the early classes right after Inconvenient Truth came out, and he said we have we have enough renewable energy. What we don't have is political will. He's still saying that. We still need it, political will. But I think that the American public needs a little bit of help in in seeing the impacts. And we know there's going to be lawsuits. I'm sure the American Lung Association is planning to file one, and Sierra Club, NRDC, Earth Justice, all those great organizations. But what a, pardon me, freaking waste of time, energy, courts, money, not between all the lawsuits that he files every day, frivolous, mostly, get bounced out of court, and all the lawsuits that need to be filed against that administration because of what they're doing, ignoring the science, the rule of law, um, like when there's so many things that we should be focused on.
I don't know if this makes you feel better or worse, but I guess I'd say we all
Chime in.
we there's always a fight over clean air protections in court because if it's a good protection that we fight for, somebody sues to stop it. And if it's a bad protection that we fought against, we or others might jump in to try and get it off the books. But I think here's the thing. The Clean Air Act is a strong law that provides a strong basis for all of these protections. And so we have a lot of court victories that we racked up over the years, we, the Lung Association, our attorneys, and others, because the fact is that EPA very clearly has to clean up pollution that makes us sick. And very clearly, the Supreme Court has said that that includes greenhouse gases, as long as greenhouse gases endanger us, which they do. So, I don't need to be overly rosy about the future of the legal fight, but I guess I'd just say, we and others are no stranger to fighting over climate protections in court, and we have a pretty good track record so far.
But if you put foxes in charge of the hen house everywhere and you have a, stacked Supreme Court, and you've got a majority in Congress, this is why we're losing, right? I mean, there's always been that pendulum swing, right? And right, left, right, left. It's too bad that, the Republican Party, frankly, has just not been, since Nixon and the Clean Air Act, supporting what needs to be supported just out of common sense. But with this, the deck is stacked here intentionally, arrogantly. I say ignorance and arrogance is a really ugly combination. Again, this administration isn't even pretending to care or to be doing good, and that's what's really outrageous. And look at the quotes from Lee Zeldin and Chris Wright and all those people. There is that the I think that's his name. They're just they're proudly either, I don't know, whether it's ignorance or arrogance or both. It's unacceptable to be leaders in this country at this time when we are losing so much in terms of nature, our health. And again, these things, some of these things are not reversible.
EPA, their mission is to protect human health and the environment. And Administrator Zeldin's first pillar of the five things he wants this administration to focus on are includes clean air for
Mhm.
every American. So, we have not hesitated to point out the fact that if you want clean air for every American, these are the steps you have to take. You have to clean up vehicles. You have to clean up power plants. You have to clean up the oil and gas industry, and a host of other harmful air pollutants. That's part of EPA's job, and they're legally required to do it.
And water pollutants, PFAS. I had a couple of people on talking about that problem, getting into water systems. I got checked recently. I've got PFAS in my body, and I guess I'm told 98% of Americans do. These are the forever chemicals that are causing some of the problems, like cancer. As I said, low birth rates. They're so concerned about us propagating and populating. Maybe they should do something about protecting the environment for, kids. Many young people not wanting to have children. I don't blame them. The disconnect to me is just what's so galling, right? The
It's
hypocrisy, the double standard, the lack of, in Yiddish, we say sekel, just intelligence, just common sense. And the fact that this is so late in the game, again, 2026, we were supposed to have, remember, cut our emissions in half by 2030. Guess what? It's 2026, and 3 more years of this. So thank you for being calm, calmer than I am. And thank you for the American Lung Association. I, I, I have empathy for your, you know, well, it's not your setbacks. When they used to say in the news, the network news anchors would say, well, environmentalists lost around today. I'd say, well, that means we all lost. It's not about Sierra Club winning. It's about people. It's about humans. It's about how do we love our kids, country, and planet. And it's getting harder and harder to feel good about that. But not for lack of trying, right? A lot of good guys out there, but they're making it really, really hard. And it shouldn't be so damn hard to do good. Sorry, I did. I,
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, right when we say like it was a bad day for everyone last week. Everybody that breathes air, drinks water, wants the earth to be a climate that they can live in. It was a bad day.
you must have heard
Um,
me. I say my program is only for those who eat, breathe, or drink. Everybody else, go about your business. Go back to
right, not for you.
pickleball, mahjong, lunch, whatever my peers are so busy doing. Sorry, fellow
Well, I
peers.
find myself to your point about the folks doing good, I find myself focusing on the fact that, and maybe this is because I live in a school district or, with teachers that are prioritize it, the way you prioritize it likely, in your environmental education and with your own family likely, my kids come home talking about climate change. When we had lots of wildfire smoke on the East Coast a couple years ago, my then 3 or 4 year old came home and said that they had to have indoor recess because of the air quality from the fires. My 8 year old comes home talking about how electric cars are less polluting for the environment than gas cars. So, that is my source of hope. At the end of the day, seeing little kids care about this from as early as they can, those are going to be the people that continue to drive change forward. We're going to do our best. But knowing that there's someone to take up the torch helps me feel a little better.
Yes, and regular listeners and watchers will know what I'm about to say, which is yet we can't just leave it up to the kids because we don't have time for them to grow up and go into the professions we need. And it's not fair, to like keep shoveling dirt on the pile while saying we need more, people to have children, in America, and yet we're not doing anything to protect them. I frankly call the Republicans the way they are today, the pro-death party. Look at COVID, look at gun control, they look at climate change, and I'll say that loudly, hopefully not get shot. But really, they're supposedly pro-life, but it's hypocrisy. It really is. It's like active shooter drills, 7 and 8 year olds should not have to be subjected to that. Any age, any school child. When my 2 year old granddaughter gets to school, I mean, I dread the day that has to be explained to them. It's just wrong. Some things are just wrong. And I think we really need to speak up more loudly. People need to support American Lung Association, independent journalists, pick one of your choice. There's a few of us out there now, but we need a bigger platform. We need to reach more of the mainstream and not just the choir, because I do think that if people knew more, and ignorance is a really bad reason to lose a good planet, um, they wouldn't vote against their interest. And again, people say, just talk to the kids. I say, the kids get it. They're going to have to get it. But it's not fair to just, leave it to them to figure out. I know that's not what you were saying, but that's why I guess perhaps I don't have quite as much hope in that because you know as well as I do that we are late in the game in terms of all the data. And like I said, some things are not so easily reversed. And good planets are hard to find.
It's such an important point. And I think, the other piece here is that my kids are super lucky because they live in a school, they have a school that is going to keep them inside when the air quality is unhealthy because they have the mental space and time to prioritize that. They
Mhm.
have a school where inside is healthy too. It's
Yeah.
not filled with mold or substandard,
Yeah.
with poor indoor air quality. So, to your point, yes, we all need to keep fighting for our kids currently so that they don't inherit an even worse mess. But also not every kid has the same opportunity to have the space to do that or a safe environment in which to learn to do that. And that's what we need to keep fighting for too.
And that was just made worse. Again, a lot of great environmental justice programs just completely obliterated. And these are the kids who are going to feel it now and in the future until we can turn things around. And Lord knows it is time. So I want to thank you so much. Been talking to Laura Kate Bender, national policy person at the American Lung Association. I'm just so glad that we got someone on the health side of this, but it is all connected, personal health, planetary health. And if you have enjoyed watching this, if you've learned anything, please tell your friends, your family, your enemies, I don't, everybody, all those who eat, breathe, or drink, about Code Green, conversations for a future we want and kids deserve. Been at this a long time. Yeah, if you can support us, we're about to relaunch my website, put a donate button on that. Didn't think about that for 28 years. Try to raise money because it's hard to do this. It takes a lot of time covering the speed. It takes a lot of out of my day often to read all this, but I feel, I guess, obliged, obsessed, to continue on this. And there's more than ever, but it's mostly online and it needs to get out, to wider audiences. So thank you. Please go to let's see, my YouTube channel. Go to @Betsy Rosenberg Interviews and subscribe and go to betsyrosenberg.com so you'll get an email description along with interviews like these to find out about our great guests and spread the word because there's not much time and there is great need to get this information out there. And thanks. We're watching the lawsuits. Let's hope they have an impact. Let's hope that people starting to speak up will have an impact. Let's hope that perhaps MAGA is losing some of its base. And I don't have anything against MAGA except everything they seem to be fighting against. That's all. Thank you. Have a great Green Day.